Any questions? Simon, any questions? Is there someone called Sally? Sally. Do you have any, Tanajan is asking, do you have any questions tonight? No questions. Fuk Chong, any questions?
In the course of developing the practice, sometimes our mindfulness is weak and our defilements seem to overwhelm us. Is there any other Dharma theme other than mindfulness that we can use to help us at this point?
It says at those times when mindfulness is weak and one defilement or another is coming up very strongly, the quality you really need to rely on at that point is khanti, patient endurance. But of course, the very nature of the question implies you probably have some mindfulness, and it's that mindfulness, even though it's very weak, it's a good starting point just to know, oh, at the moment I have a lot of lust or greed, or at the moment I have anger. Even though you can't stop it coming up, it's taken over your mind, at least you have a little bit of awareness just to know that's where I'm at, that's what I've got. And then you rely on your patience not to follow it, not to build it up, indulge it, not to act on it, but just bear with it in your mind as long as you don't have enough mindfulness to let it go yet, until gradually the kilesa itself will also become weak, because it's impermanent thing. Whatever mood you have, whether it's lust, whether it's anger, whether it's delusion of some sort, sooner or later that itself will start to fade from the mind. It will weaken down. And it's at that point where it starts to weaken that you can re-establish strong mindfulness. You've been kind of like half following it along. You'll notice the point where it starts to fade from the mind. Then you re-establish strong, good mindfulness. And it's at that point, say you've been caught into a mood of lust, where you might bring up the contemplation of the unattractiveness of the body at that point. And because that mood of lust has gradually faded, now you can review it with fresh mindfulness, strong mindfulness and wisdom at that point. Or if it was anger, you were very upset, very emotional about something, now that that emotion has passed and faded from the mind, that is the time that you bring up mindfulness, say, of metta, kindness, compassion, again, reviewing that past mood and then teaching your mind at that point using the wholesome Dhamma that you're bringing up with this new, fresh mindfulness. The important thing to do at those times when we do have a particular kilesa overwhelming the mind and it seems like there's nothing we can do about it other than just bear with it, don't let your mind get caught into the desire for peace and say, oh, I wish it wasn't here. I wish I wasn't all stirred up like this. I wish I was peaceful. Because you're only adding to your suffering at that point, and it will confuse you further and make it even harder to practice this patience until the mood has passed away. You're just, interfering with it as it were. So the main thing is just practice patience, endurance, and as much mindfulness as you can. You just keep following along with that mood. You're that way, and then when it gradually fades from the mind, then you start practicing mindfulness again, re-establish mindfulness, and contemplate what's past, and see if you can get some insight on it.
How do we develop upekkha when doing the 4 brahmaviharas?
The 4 brahmaviharas are skillful practices. They're really specifically what we call samatha meditation practices, and they have specific aims and help. Sometimes are used particularly for people with specific personality traits. So, for instance, the first, metta brahmavihara, is the development of the thought of, or the object of loving kindness, loving friendliness as a meditation object, and is particularly used by those who, of the character, the dosa jarita, the angry character. One develops this because it's developing the quality that they're obviously lacking. If one tends towards negativity, aversion in one's outlook towards oneself and others, that means one's lacking metta. So one's developing metta to bring up and balance one's outlook, one's attitude towards oneself and others. And the result is that the heart cools down, so one achieves some peace and stability of samadhi. Karuna is compassion. It's that aspiration to help others, to free them from suffering, or free oneself from suffering, or to help others avoid suffering, or oneself avoid suffering. And again, it's a skillful quality one can direct the mind to bring up. Mudita is sympathetic joy or altruistic joy, where one is developing a sense of sharing in the happiness, the success of others. So it's the direct opposite of the quality of envy or jealousy. And it brings the mind to coolness and peace by whenever one is aware of the success, the goodness of others, the success, the happiness of others, one finds peace in that. So one's mind is brought to a sense of coolness and peace. The direct opposite, say, if one was stirred up with jealousy or envy. As far as upekkha goes, as a brahmaviharas, it's that sense of detached equanimity, based on the understanding that whatever happens to other people, that's the result of their individual karma, and one is not in one's mind adding on anything to that with one's attitude towards them. One isn't getting caught up or adding on mentally to particularly to the suffering of other people. So one might be aware that somebody has had some suffering, bad things have happened to them. One might be aware this is a result of their own negative karmic creations. They've been caught into greed, anger, or delusion in some way. That's come up, it's brought them suffering. One might have the desire to help them and wish to help them. One might be successful in helping them, but sometimes one isn't successful in helping them. All of this one has to carry on with an attitude of equanimity, just accepting, well, this is their karma. One does maybe what one can, but the outcome, one has to be able to accept it, whether one can help successfully or it's beyond one's ability. One has to be able to be at peace with that. So again, it's that sense of equanimity based on an understanding of karma that brings the mind to coolness. And in particular, one isn't in any way making anything out of, say, the suffering of others. One isn't making it worse or seeking to harm them or look down on them. If one sees other people suffering, that wouldn't be upekkha if one was to say, sort of, look down at them and say, oh, they deserve it, or they're just such a bad person, or whatever. It's this coolness of heart where it's just recognizing, well, this is the result of karma. So as a practice in the brahmaviharas, it's particularly a samatha practice in that sense, just bringing the mind to this sense of coolness where it can accept karma, each individual's karma, one's own and one's others, with equanimity and a coolness. Upekkha as a enlightenment factor, what we call upekkha sambojjhanga, is based particularly on insight into the nature of phenomena as anicca, dukkha, anatta, and in practice it's maintaining that state of mind, place of mind in the middle, where it's not caught into liking or disliking, not caught into any kind of desires or preferences. With these practice, the brahmaviharas, they have the simile or the contemplation just as an example. Say when you have metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha in the mind developed well, the attitude is one of a sense of seeing oneself and others all much the same. One doesn't have preferences in the mind. One isn't attached or clinging to other people or oneself. One sees everyone, oneself and others, all of us the same. So, for instance, if say a group of terrorists were to grab you and a few of your friends, say 5 of you, take you all hostage, and then they decided to kill one of you, it would be that sense of absolutely the same whether they take you or they take one of the others. The mind would have no preferences. It would have equanimity there. That would be a good example of equanimity at work in the brahmaviharas. Does that help?
When practicing the 4 brahmaviharas, do we do them separately or do they all arise together?
Probably in practical terms, we all tend to develop the first one, metta, which is probably why it was put first in the order. We'll develop that first. It's very much sort of the heart of Buddhist practice, and especially in the beginning, one is just developing metta, sense of kindness, friendliness towards oneself and others. And you can see in the practical development of the mind, the spiritual development of the mind, the more metta is developed, well, the other 3 brahmaviharas will grow out of that very easily, very naturally. So, say one is developing a friendly, positive outlook towards other people, when they have success and happiness and good things happen, one immediately has a sense of sharing, wanting to share in that success. One is happy for them. Or if they have suffering, one will have a sense of concern for them that they're suffering, or what can I do to help? So the other 3 will tend to grow out of metta. But he said at the beginning, they can be practiced individually, obviously, as individual meditation techniques as well, but they'll tend to also support and grow out of each other. The question was how to practice with painful feelings that arise during our meditation when we're sitting, pain in the legs and so on. And Ajahn said in the beginning, when our practice was still new and our level of mindfulness and other qualities are maybe still developing, we just have to learn the right balance, and if the dukkha vedana, the painful feelings, are just getting too much, well, we have to use changing of posture to get by. We move our legs, we stand up and so on. But as the practice continues and we do it more regularly, we'll find the level of mindfulness, the level of patient endurance, the level of wisdom will come up. And you might find sometimes that you don't need to always just move when there's pain. One can start to investigate pain, meaning when there's painful feelings arising, if they keep coming into consciousness, bothering you, you keep turning your mindfulness to be mindful of the vedana itself, and to investigate by literally asking oneself questions about it. You know, where is it coming from? What's the source of this vedana? Why is it here? You can maybe bring up the contemplation, a dead person has no vedana. Why is that? Because their consciousness and the body have separated. I have this vedana here. Why is that? Well, because the 5 khandhas, they're still all intermingled. There's still attachment here. There's still a sense of attachment to this body. Therefore, when vedana arises, I feel pain and I attach to that pain. There's no real separation in any of that. No, not yet any wisdom in that. So you keep investigating in different ways, contemplating it, and also one's patience comes up, and one might start to actually experience a sense of separation. One can see the separation between the mind that knows the vedana, the body, because in essence these are all what we call elements and khandhas. These are separate things, parts of nature that are individual of themselves. They're not anything that you can say is a self, and that sense of ownership comes through delusion. So as we start investigating, the sense of ownership and identification with the pain starts to diminish. Now, of course, at first that doesn't mean the vedana completely disappears. It might mean at first that one can just sit there with this insight developing, and one can just sit longer with more pain and deal with more pain. But sometimes it might actually mean that having contemplated and really seen it as, say, anicca, dukkha, anatta, the whole pain just disappears, and actually one completely frees oneself from pain during the meditation. But what one will also experience is that, of course, say one might be trying very hard with mindfulness and developing wisdom during the meditation, and as one finishes, then one might find the level of mindfulness and wisdom sort of drops a bit, and then, that was a lot of pain, and it all comes back, and one back to square one. One has a sense of identification with it, or not just physical pain of the body associated with sitting a long time, which is to do with the interruption of the movement of the blood and oxygen around the body. That's where sort of pain often is coming from. But other kinds of pain or discomfort could be, say, from the weather, like feelings of coldness, feelings of heat. And one finds sort of as one finishes the meditation, suddenly what one could bear because one was really practicing mindfulness and not giving in to the thoughts and the proliferation around them, that stops a bit. So one immediately says, oh, it's so cold, or oh, it's so hot, or my leg hurts so much, and one's back to square one. So one just has to keep building up this ability to be mindful of the particular painful discomfort, the painful feeling or the discomfort, and over time both one's endurance develops and also one's ability to be mindful of Vedana in itself and investigate it, to see it as something separate from the mind that's trained in mindfulness and wisdom. One will develop that sense of separation more, and one will be able to last longer and go for longer periods of practice like that. There was a question, when we finish our meditation session, should we spread metta as a sort of a conscious act at that point, say at the end of a meditation session? Or should we or could we share the merits of our practice? And is there a difference between spreading metta and dedicating merit? And say one is dedicating merit to somebody, does one think of their face or their name or whatever? And Ajahn answered that generally when one becomes peaceful, and say particularly towards the end of a meditation, then it is a good practice to, we say, spread metta. That's a very general practice where one is just directing the sense of peace, happiness that has arisen in the mind outwards to all beings. So it's a very general practice to all beings everywhere. The practice of sharing merit or dedicating merit is specifically for the dead, and one will tend to do it. One can do it at that time as well, say at the end of a period of practice when one's feeling peaceful, one might want to dedicate that to a person. Generally it's our relatives, friends, relatives who have died, and one has to, in one's mind, somehow identify the person. So it might be thinking of their face, saying their name, thinking of that person in some way, and it's as if inviting them to share in the goodness of one's practice at that time one is doing that. So it's a more specific thing, and specifically for the dead.
Can you share your merits with the living as well as with the dead?
It's really that practice of spreading metta.
I was meditating once and I had a mental image come up of my friend with all sorts of grass and roots coming out of them at all the different sense doors. I think this has a Dharma meaning, but I'm not sure. Could you help explain what it maybe means?
You might say this is a sort of an image, a refined image of what's going on in the mind, the way the sense doors become a form, a doorway, a pathway for attachment to arise. But that's just an image, giving you an example of, say, the refined process that's going on. One doesn't really have to concentrate on that or concern oneself with that. What one has to look at is each sense contact that is arising, whether it's, say, one's seeing a form, one's hearing, one's smelling, and the reaction and any particular craving and attachment arising from that. One just is mindful of that from moment to moment, and when one sees a kilesa forming based on some sense contact one's had, one contemplates to see that as anicca, dukkha, anatta, to let go of that particular desire and attachment, and that will automatically be cutting off the very roots which stretch back to or go back to the heart. One doesn't have to worry about the heart or the roots being down there and this sort of refined kind of idea of the sense doorways, one leading to the other. One just goes to whatever sense contact is arising from moment to moment, and one's job is to keep practicing mindfulness continuously to the point when the mind becomes firm in samadhi, becomes peaceful, and then one should have a good foundation to just keep contemplating anicca, dukkha, anatta, and this will be cutting off the sense of self and the mental proliferation and the attachments that are forming with each sense contact as it arises. And if one keeps doing that, well, naturally it will reach a point where one has completely uprooted one defilement or another. It will keep uprooting completely and no longer just be sort of a temporary thing.